You're listening to the Sanditon Chronicles, where we talk all things Sanditon and Sanditon adjacent. Come along with us as we dissect all of your favorite characters, scenes, and dialogue. We have so much to tell you.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Sanditon Chronicles. I'm Maureen.
I'm Janice.
And I know that we told you we are not going anywhere, and we are not going anywhere. That being said, I realize we've been away for about 3 weeks, maybe 4. And we did have this episode we are going to record for you tonight. We already had it recorded, already had it done, but it actually didn't record. So that's why there's been an absence. We've had some issues with that and with scheduling. So we're going to be giving you 2 a week from here until the end of October. So you'll be getting 8 episodes this month to make up for my big mistake. And so you'll be getting today, you will have listened to the Ralph Starling one. Fun fact, Janice just told me tonight that is a bird. A starling is a bird. It's a black bird that has pretty, is it blue and purple feathers with its black?
Pretty black.
And I looked it up and it said that it is a confident bird. It walks confidently and it's known for its beautiful dancing. So Paula Byrne, if you are listening to this and there is a reason behind that name, I would really like to dive into that last name choice. So interesting fun fact about Ralph. But today we are going to be talking about Mrs. Wheatley and her relationships. And part of me is bummed because I feel like we made a lot of really good points the last time we talked about it. And I know this whole time I'm going to sit here trying to remember all of the points that we made, which is going to be futile because I don't even remember one of them. But we love Mrs. Wheatley. We didn't do a character assessment of her last season for season 2. And I think part of the reason was we didn't get a whole lot of her.
Yeah.
So, but she was, even though we didn't get a whole lot of her, she was pivotal in the background scene. She was pivotal to Alexander, certainly pivotal to Sam and their relationship. And I think in season 3, we got a much deeper look into her. So the fact that we didn't do one for season 2 is no bearing on how we feel about Mrs. Wheatley or what her importance is in the show. It's just because we needed more to go off of. And we got that, I think, with season 2 and season 3.
Absolutely. I mean, season 2, we learned a lot more about the background, and she also just had more parts and more interesting parts. In season 3, season 2, of course, it starts with her. The first time we see her is when Charlotte brings the girls home from the parade after Leonara had almost gotten hit by a horse.
Yep.
And then when she tells her that they're looking for a governess, and then of course we find out that Charlotte decides she wants to become a governess because she doesn't want to remarry, right?
Yeah.
Or doesn't want to marry. I shouldn't say remarry. Hasn't been married yet. She doesn't want to marry and not have any control over her life, basically. And then we see the most charming part is when we see that Mrs. Wheatley and Colburn, Xander, we come to know him by, have a bet.
Yes. And
she wins and he's paying up.
And
of course, the bet was how long Charlotte would last.
Yeah. And I think that's really indicative of not just the kind of relationship they have, but how long they've had a relationship, because that relationship was familial. It was very close. It was very friendly. And we see in season 3 that she has been with them, or we hear from Mrs. Wheatley that she's been with them since she was 14. And
right.
we are trying to do the math on how old Mrs. Wheatley is. And I would say she's what, 50s, maybe late 40s?
Well, I think we decided that she was probably, like in her 20s when the boys were born.
Yes.
And they're, probably 35-ish, maybe a little older. So, she's probably maybe 10 years older than them.
Yeah.
So 45, 50, somewhere in there.
So I think that back then, when you worked in a house like that, there were nannies that took care of the babies, but also if you worked in the house and you were closer in age, you would be kind of drawn to them. So she had watched them be raised. She didn't start off as the head housekeeper. She wouldn't have started off as a head housekeeper at 14. So she sort of worked her way up into this position. And as she did, she grew up with the boys. And so she has known them since they were born, most likely. And
Yeah.
so knowing that all we ever hear about is their father, we don't really hear about their mother. So
yeah, we don't.
you have to, just given that one scene that we have where they're placing the bet, and also the time when she affectionately calls him Xander, because she's the first one who does that. She almost has a motherly role in their life, and they allow her, because they grew up knowing her. They've always known her. She's always been there with this family as far as they're concerned.
The one constant. Yeah. And we really see that at the end of season 2, where she says you just can't go back to the way you were. And that's when she calls him Xander.
Yep.
That's our first introduction to that nickname.
And it shows that she's not just an employee of the Colburn. She is, for all intents and purposes, she is a Colburn. For all intents and purposes, she is a member of this family who deeply cares what happens to not just Xander and Samuel, but also to Leonora and to Augusta. She genuinely cares what happens to them, and she's protective of them. Moment where she calls him Xander, she's not yelling at him. She's not in his face about it. She's not trying to take authority over him, but she's showing him that she's loyal to him, but she still is worried that he's going to mess things up.
Right. Because they go back to the depression he'd been in, basically, and the self-hate and all of that. Also, the other thing that we talked about was from season 2, we know that she would not have been a nanny or a governess herself, because she's obviously responsible for the household, the housekeeping, not because when Charlotte comes in and she is looking for the girls and is told that Leo is taken off, they don't know where she is. She's nowhere to be found, at least in the house. It's obvious she doesn't see it as her responsibility to go find her. So that is really others' responsibility.
Judging by how long that she has been there and how old we assume she is, based on how old we assume the Colburn men are, she has worked her way up to head housekeeper. So as in charge of the house, she would have likely been in the way she is in this position. I feel like she has been in that position for a while.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we don't know if she's promoted by Alexander's father or if she's promoted by Xander, but either way, she has been head housekeeper for a while.
Right. And she tells us that she had started working for their father. So yeah,
when she's 14,
for a long time.
And I think the other aspect we see of her, obviously we see most of what we see here is in the context of the Colburn household and being who she is in there. And I even love in season 2 when she is showing Charlotte, I almost called her Eliza, when she's showing Charlotte around the house and she's talking about the girls and she's telling them all this stuff about the past governesses and things like that. I love watching her do that, watching her talk to her and being very honest and very real. She doesn't hide anything. But then you also see her with Georgiana and you get a whole other side to her. You see this compassionate, loving side because she is loyal to her family, which is the Colburns. But then you also see this compassionate, empathetic side when she's talking to Georgiana. And of course, I'm talking about the one line where Georgiana is walking to the house for the shooting party. And she says that I'm sorry for you, essentially. Georgiana says, didn't you hear I won? She says, that's not what I was referring to. And obviously she's talking about
the loss of her parents. Yeah.
Yes.
That she doesn't really, her father died and she didn't know her mother.
Yeah. And the things that came out at trial about how her father felt about her mother, I'm sure that was written about in the papers. I'm sure it got back to Mrs. Wheatley that it was a slave and a master, and it was a slave master relationship. And I think that would have been painful for Georgiana. And this is where we hear, because Samuel asks her at that point about her, and she says, no, my parents loved each other. Yeah. And I grew up knowing both of my parents. And so even though that's what she grew up with, she was instantly empathetic to Georgiana's plight of having this knowledge about her parents, not only the loss of both of her parents, but the loss of who she thought her parents were.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I love the insight we get, especially from season 3 about her. And one of the early scenes we see her in there is when she's walking with the girls in town. They're shopping.
Yep.
And she's very clear to say to Augusta that you need to have nothing to do with that man, meaning Edward, who would just run into her. Yeah, and drop the packages. I mean, it's hard to, it was so smooth. I don't know if it was intentional or unintentional, but
No.
you
want to
can't
say it is when it's Edward, that it was intentional and
Right.
plotted out, but it also did seem like it was fairly accidental, and it was like from then his plan hatched, but
right,
I don't
right.
know.
Yeah, we don't know. Well, and she was so brusque with him, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
So the other thing earlier on than that, when we see Mrs. Wheatley, is when the girls run into Charlotte on the beach. I think it was on the beach.
Yep.
And she says to Charlotte, Hayward Place, filled your absence.
Yeah.
That's what it says. You know, so you can tell that she really cares about her too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you could say it stems from Alexander clearly cared for her, and the girls clearly cared for her. So that instilled her to care for Charlotte. But I think what we can see of Mrs. Wheatley, certainly given the light of what she says to Augusta about Edward, that her judge of character is impeccable. And I think she can see in Charlotte I mean, obviously she would have to be blind, deaf, and dumb to not see the effect that Charlotte had in the household. Music very literally came to life again in that household when Charlotte was there. So I think she loves Charlotte because Xander loves her, because the girls love her. But I think she loves Charlotte because Charlotte very literally saved her family from desolation.
Right.
At least emotionally.
And because Charlotte has a lot of gumption.
Yes.
Isn't going to be walked all over.
Mm-mm.
And, you know, she witnesses all of that. And she also, because Charlotte cares so much for that family, how could she help but care for Charlotte?
Exactly. And I think Charlotte's compassionate nature, and the fact that Charlotte never gave up on the girls, even when they were begging her to. She wouldn't give up on them, in the same way that she wouldn't give up on Xander, no matter how mean he was, that she just got honest with him. I think that the way that Mrs. Wheatley would have judged Charlotte's character was to be such that she loved her just for her, in addition to saving her family, because Charlotte is that kind of person. And Mrs. Wheatley is a great judge of character.
Yeah, I think you're right.
That scene where she apologizes to Georgiana, the other thing I think that's interesting about it is that this is the height, right, of Georgiana or not the height. It's the start of her going down this frivolous, overspending, monotonous party lifestyle with Sir Harry.
Right.
And I think it's Mrs. Wheatley, while Charlotte was concerned, Mrs. Wheatley was the only one to look at her and see through
she
her
really
layers.
Yeah.
She could see that this is not a time of celebration for Georgiana, even though she's putting this on, even though she's drinking with her friends champagne on the beach. She can see this is not really who you are, and this is what you need to hear, is that I am sorry that this happened to you.
Right.
So you can see that's her key role, I think, in all this in the background, is to pick apart all of these little nuances and all these people that come through Hayward Park.
Right. And it's so interesting after Samuel defended Georgiana, and then he's back at Hayward Place, and now he has a different perspective too, because of what he's just been through with Georgiana. And he says to her, asks about her background. I've never asked about your family before. You know, that's when we learned that she did grow up with two parents that loved each other, and came to England to be free.
Yeah. Yes. I forgot that they came to England to be free. That's how that worked.
Yeah. I mean, how that all happened, we don't know. But, you know, still wish we had that background history that Justin wrote for Ben to really know who Colburn were. Yeah, we wish we had that.
I mean, seriously, I'm not kidding when I say if you publish that book, man, it will be sold out like that. Like it will, we will buy it.
I think it's probably more like a pamphlet, but yeah.
Still, I think we would pay big money for a pamphlet, Justin. We just want more Sanditon. We don't really particularly care how it comes. We just want more of it.
Have to reach out to him, I guess. Huh?
Yes, absolutely. And I think too that with Samuel, we got to see that scene where she walks Susan in at the end. Well, I think it was in the final episode, but not the end of the final episode. It's where she walks him in after they've already said goodbye to each other, and he's at the fireplace, upset and sad. And Mrs. Wheatley gets to walk Susan in, and the look on this, she doesn't say much. In fact, I don't think she says anything really other than addressing Samuel and telling him, you know, someone's here to see you, whatever.
Right.
But the look on her face is so expressive of delight and joy because she knows what this means to him. And she also had a husband, didn't she? Mrs. Wheatley?
Yeah, we know nothing about him.
Mm-hmm. So to know that she came from a loving household where parents did love each other, did live together, were free. She has been at this household since she was 14. She has been married, still in this household. You have to assume that she had at least a somewhat decent relationship with her husband. If and nothing else, they have been there together.
Possibly he was a servant in the household too.
Yes, I think that would be a necessary thing. And I would like to think, of course, we aren't given the best image of original Mr. Colburn, we're given the idea to believe that he was a drunkard or some at least borderline alcoholic, if not full-blown alcoholic. So the image of him isn't great, but his sons and the way Mrs. Wheatley cares for their sons is a whole different image. So I like to believe that she comes from a loving relationship with her husband. And so knowing that she understands what that relationship is, what that love is, the joy on her face when she gets to walk Susan into what she knows is a love match for her, essentially her son.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's just sheer delight on her face.
Her oldest son.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, yeah. She's just such a wonderful character. And the actress is so good. I mean, I think the casting on this whole series was amazing. And so the actress's name is Flo Wilson, and she's from Manchester, England. And she began her career at 21 in the theater. And the company she was with was called Pit Prop Theater Company, a radical company that set out to challenge many of the assumptions and attitudes prevalent in society. For example, productions were inspired by the miners' strike of 1984-85, the anti-apartheid movement, and racial prejudice. Pit Prop was particularly active in the theater and education movement, touring schools and community theaters. So she did a lot of stage work.
I love hearing that. I think stage work makes you such a better, well-rounded actor.
Right.
And you can tell in her.
Yeah, she did a lot of time in York, in the theater there.
I think that plays heavily into the facial expressions, because when you're on stage and you don't always have lines to deliver, you have to deliver it with your body and your face.
Right. Yeah. But anyway, so just what a great choice she was.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And she was in Death in Paradise, which Chris Marshall was also in. She was in there for an episode.
Yeah. And she was on Coronation Street. I don't know how much, but
that's right. Yeah,
a well-known series. And it says most recently she was in Emmerdale, which is another ITV production.
And that looks current.
Yeah. Whoa. Yeah. Sorry, I hit my table.
So if you want to see her, now that goes from, it says so far she's been in 47 episodes of that. And it says it's from 2021 to 2023. So it is still current. If you want to watch something that she's currently in, go check that out. Emmerdale Farm. You might be able to get it on BritBox. Maybe. I haven't seen that come across my BritBox, but I don't know. I haven't looked for it
but
either.
There's shows you have to search for.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe the reactions of the family to her.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's
Really
go there.
talked about that too much, other than when Samuel asked her the question. But it was obvious that he was really happy to see her when he arrived, for the first time after 10 years,
Yeah.
and as well as her being happy to see him. I think the the girls were very responsive to her. You didn't really, even though they were at times acting very spoiled or very contrary, you never saw them acting that way towards her.
No.
Yeah, I think they were very respectful of her.
And I think it's very telling that though she's the head housekeeper, yes, Charlotte didn't work there anymore, but she was the one walking through town with them in season 3 with Augusta and Leo, holding their hand, at least holding Leo's hand, walking next to Augusta. It was her who was walking beside them. She didn't send out another maid. She didn't send out the lady's maid or another servant. She went up with them.
And when Augusta and Leo went and talked to Georgiana and got themselves invited to the birthday party, well, not Leo, but the adults invited, she was the one, she witnessed them coming in and talking to him. She was part of the little talk that they had with kitchen. Her and Leo and Augusta about how they needed to get Colburn and Xander and Charlotte together. That Augusta was talking about how she was sure that they were in love and they needed to find a way to get them together, which is how they came up with the plan of getting invited to the party, and so that they would dance together.
Yes.
And she was part of that conversation. And I think very supportive.
Yes, absolutely. She said without saying what needed to be said.
Right.
She hinted and she alluded, so she didn't quite break any confidence. She didn't say anything untoward to the girls about their father or their father figure.
No.
But she said enough to give them the idea of the truth.
Right.
And I think she was her facial expressions there. She was almost excited to talk to them about this.
Right.
Yeah. No, I meant for Xander.
Well, I think, we can surmise after her response to him right before he left Herrick Place at the end of season 2, that she thought they belonged together.
Yep.
For sure. And so she's kind of in the background a lot when we see lots of conversations, and they're always warm towards her. And like you said, her expressions are wonderful,
Yeah.
That. And remember when they were getting ready to go to the party, she fixed his tie or whatever it was,
His cravat.
Thank you. His cravat. So she wanted him to go out in his best condition.
Yep. And that wasn't she in the scene standing next to Alexander and Samuel when Augusta was outside and Leo was at the window saying our favorite line of, is a beastly business. She was there too. And she had that indulgent smile on her face when Leo said that. And then the way she looked at Xander when he said, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but he said something along the lines of, I don't recommend you fall in love with anybody either, Leo.
Yeah.
And the indulgent look that she gave him when he said that, it was an all too knowing, sympathetic expression, but also like, why?
I think it was like, avoid it if you can.
Yes, that's what he said.
Yeah, and then it was. Then she and Leo left together, and he, because of course they were all watching Augusta being just distraught out the window, and she was in the garden, and then the gentlemen had their conversation together about how they were feeling. A lot of times they'll end the show with a cast party. They'll make the wedding scene into a big cast party. So everybody really is there, whether they make it on camera. And she may have been on camera earlier and just didn't make the cut. You know what I mean?
Yeah. She just wasn't sitting where I thought she was sitting. But I do remember her, and I have a tendency sometimes, I will fully admit, of remembering things that didn't actually happen.
Yes,
It's
you
why I'm
do.
afraid of canoes, because I have a memory from when I was a kid and my dad's like, that never happened. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I've been afraid of them my whole life because of this one single memory. But I do remember seeing her at the wedding breakfast. I thought I remembered seeing her at the ceremony, but I did not see her at the ceremony. But I'm pretty sure I remember seeing her at the wedding breakfast. I mean,
They
it's at
didn't
Hayrick
show
Park.
they didn't show a wedding breakfast in this.
Well, no, that's where they were walking in for. When they walked into Hayrick Park, into that room where we see everybody and we see
Oh, that was like
that's
the
what Chris was
announcement,
CGI'd in.
wasn't it?
No,
Oh, I see. After the wedding.
yeah,
After the wedding. Okay.
that would have
Yeah.
been the wedding breakfast that they went to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and it was at Hayrick. Well, I mean, we assume it's at Hayrick Park, so I'm pretty sure I saw her there. And I think that she played such a pivotal role in giving Alexander the confidence to be with Charlotte, of giving Charlotte the wherewithal to do what needed to be done with Alexander. She gave everybody such a pillar. She was such a pillar of strength to everybody. And I think that her character, though quiet, she can't be unnoticed because she is such a pillar of strength and fortitude for all of the characters that she comes across. Certainly Georgiana and Charlotte and the Colburns.
Right. I think the other scene that she was in that comes to mind is when she was in the entry and in the entry hall, and Charlotte came looking for Colburn to tell him that she was no longer engaged, but he was out riding horses or something. And so she said, well, she'd be happy to take a message. And she's like, well, I think this is a message that needs to be delivered in person. And then, of course, this little misunderstanding happens. And, I just paused the picture of the wedding. All the Parker children are there. Pretty much everybody. There's some gentleman in there that I don't recognize. I don't know. He could have been a part of the crew that just got to be in the wedding scene. You know what I mean? But I do not see Mrs. Wheatley, at least not in a distinct enough way at this point. But Otis and Georgiana and Angie Harmon, Miss Harmon, are all together.
I think it's a little strange that they would go to great lengths to show Miss Harmon there, but not Mrs. Wheatley. And I understand Mrs. Wheatley is a housekeeper of that place, and she was probably in charge of making sure the wedding breakfast went off the way it needed to go off.
Right.
But they also made a very big deal and a point to make her family throughout the 2 seasons we had with her.
Right.
So I feel like even showing her in the background of a doorway, that's where I remember seeing her. And maybe I just superimposed her there in my head because I think she is important enough to be at least appearing in the background, watching Alexander and Charlotte share this day.
At least important enough to us.
Yes. Well, I think important enough to Xander too.
Yeah, it's entirely possible that she was in an earlier scene and just didn't make the cut.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it didn't make the,
And before people come on here and try to say that it's different customs because she's an employee, I understand that. I understand that she is the head housekeeper and that they're the housekeepers and the maids and all the people who work for the house. Their goal was to be not seen and not heard. But
okay, so I'm going to change my mind now because I just watched the scene where you said the wedding breakfast, the reception, I would call it, but whatever. And she walked in with a bonnet on, and now I think I saw that bonnet behind somebody's head in the wedding scene. So I think she was at the back. I think you're right. I think she was at the back of the room. It's just that her head was behind somebody else.
Yeah. And I think that's probably realistic. She would have been in the back because I mean, we see that Miss Harmon and Georgiana and Otis are in the front because they don't work for the Colburns. So I'm not saying she would be in the back because of her color or anything. I'm saying that she would be in the back because she was family. So she was there, but she is also a housekeeper of the house. So she would have been in the back.
And she wouldn't have walked into the reception with that kind of bonnet on.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty confident you're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I would foresee her seeing, like, she would still have to kind of work well, I mean, they called it the morning, what did I call it before? wedding breakfast.
Yeah.
That's what they would call it then, because they would come together for a meal. They would get relatively early in the day. So I think that as the head housekeeper at Hayrick Park, she would be a big part of putting that on and making sure things came out of the kitchen when they needed to, and making sure things organized. So I would see her more at the wedding breakfast, being in a doorway, watching them greet as they come in, watching them greet her. But that's what I would imagine her doing.
Well, the scene I just watched, she walks in and is greeted by Charlotte and the Parker children and Mary.
Well, she walks in with the bonnet. I thought you were saying that she doesn't walk in with the bonnet.
No, she walks in with the bonnet on.
Gotcha. Okay. And I think that would be right and deserving of her, I think, because that they are different people. Like the Colburns, which now include Charlotte, they are different in that their employees are not just employees. They're beloved and their family. Right. And I think that ushering her in that way, I think, is a really smart thing to play out.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think we've taken her from the moment we first see her, right on the doorstep with Leo and Augusta and Charlotte, to the very last time we see her, quite literally, in season 3 at the wedding breakfast. Right. So I think, to surmise, and I think Janice and I are on the same page on this, she's a great character. She's powerful, she's strong, she's loving, she's family. We really enjoyed this character. And I think if she was not included in the show, I think things could have ended very differently. I think she was a lot of the push for Alexander to get out of himself, get out of his own way.
Yeah, she was definitely a very calm stability in that household.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And important to the household. I mean, who knows how they could have written it differently, but the way they wrote it was pretty wonderful.
Yes, I agree. No complaints about Mrs. Wheatley at all from this corner here. So let us know in the comments what you thought of Mrs. Wheatley. Did you have a favorite scene of hers? Did you have Janice? Did you have a favorite scene of hers? I know
that's pretty hard to say. Probably one of my favorite scenes is when she's in the kitchen with the girls and they're sort of plotting to get Charlotte and Xander together.
Mm-hmm. It's that one, or it's the bet one, or the one where she calls him Xander. So I have 3 favorite scenes of hers.
Yeah.
So let us know if you have a favorite scene of hers. If you think we got it right, you think we got it wrong, whatever it is, let us know your thoughts here and leave it in the comment below. Please remember to subscribe to our channel so we can get our viewership up. We were discussing beforehand, things are going to change a little bit, not for you, but for how we record things, for how we get you these podcasts, for how they get them out to you. We're going to keep them on all the same stations, but we're going to consolidate. We have 2 different platforms that we have to broadcast from for this podcast, just to make sure that you guys can listen to it on any podcast platform you can get it on. So know that that's coming, and we are trying to make things work financially for this podcast to keep it going. So if you can just subscribe to our podcast, which is totally free, the more people we have subscribed, the better we can get you interviews, but also the greater ability we have to start making something that we can put back into this podcast to make it the best that it can be for you. Also, remember, we have memberships. If that's something you want to go into, you can get a YouTube membership with us, and that ranges from $2.99 a month to $24.99 a month. So don't feel obligated to do that if you don't want to, but that is an option for you. We also have a Patreon account through our Podbean, and then we also have it's like a Patreon, but it's called Patron. It's not Patreon, but it's very, very similar, on our Buzzsprout page, which you can listen to through Spotify. So check out those avenues if you want to help us out, and stay tuned for all those updates that are coming at you. We'll give you a full update when we know exactly how it's going to change, how you'll be able to find us in the future. And we'd love to hear from you. So make sure you check out our socials, emailing us, and we will see you for another 2 episodes next week. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Are you craving more TSC content? Head on over to our social media accounts. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and our Facebook group, the Sanditon Chronicles Sanditon Family Fan Club. Also, check out our website, thesanditonchronicles.com. Of course, we want to hear from you. We want to know what you want to hear and what your thoughts are. Email us at the.sanditonchronicles@gmail.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in every week for new episodes.